The Halloween party was already in full swing when my wife and I arrived. It was hard to take my eyes off her toned figure, perfectly highlighted by her tight, jet-black Catwoman costume. Despite having 2 children, she remained beautiful, and with my parents watching the kids for the weekend, ALICIA looked genuinely attractive. I have to admit, I sometimes forget just how stunning she really is. I was dressed as a pirate, well dressed, of course, but nothing spectacular. ALICIA gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and went off to chat with the other guests. I headed over to the drinks area, where several of my friends were in the middle of a heated debate. They seemed tense. As soon as I got close enough to listen, I understood why the tension was so high. It was one of those debates that challenge your intellect and force you to think outside the box. Who would win, Hulk or Superman? I had to shake my head at the absurdity of such debates. You'd think that in a room full of adult, intelligent men, there would be more meaningful topics of conversation. Everyone knows Superman is the obvious choice. Why were they even discussing it? Either way, I decided to join this monumental debate, offering my expert opinion, which I had gathered from a scientific perspective thanks to my extensive research during childhood. This included countless hours of reading Marvel and DC comics. Given that my knowledge clearly surpassed anyone else's, I was confident my contribution would settle the debate once and for all. Surprisingly, the other participants didn't take my arguments into account at all. I only managed to make the conversation louder. But that's what happens when you mix adult men with beer. You get a group of teenagers, burping and sometimes arguing. You wouldn't think that in a room filled with scantily clad nurses, cat women, and various animal costumes, our focus would remain on such trivial discussions. We all had to agree to postpone the discussion. There was too much beer and too much fun going around. I planned to stay relatively sober since I knew ALICIA wouldn't be the one driving us home. We had just arrived, and I could already tell she was having a great time. She was sitting on the couch next to her best friend, Susie. Susie was also dressed as Catwoman, and yes, she had put just as much effort into her costume as ALICIA had. ALICIA and Susie had been inseparable since high school. As kids, they lived on the same street. They were so alike that the only way they could coexist in the same place at the same time was either as best friends or as rivals. They spoke the same way, dressed similarly, did almost everything together, and even looked alike. Both sets of parents were like second families to each of them. A long-running joke when they were teenagers was that one of their mothers had twins and gave the extra one to the other family. The only mystery was figuring out who the real mother was. By the way, they both hated that joke. Susie was married to a guy named Damon. They got married 2 years before ALICIA and I did. At that point, ALICIA and I had been married for 6 years. You might think that since the two women were so similar in many ways, they would have married the same type of man. Wrong. Susie's husband is my complete opposite. I don't do much physical labor at work, while Dominique works with his hands all day. I'm the district manager for 6 local restaurants owned by my company. While I'm not anti-suit, I generally maintain a professional demeanor. And in case you're wondering, I'm not a nerd or a weirdo. I played baseball in high school and even did some boxing in college. Though boxing was more of a hobby than a career for me, it helped me stay fit. I admit that after getting married and settling into family life, my gym time decreased a bit, or maybe a lot, but I wasn't out of shape and managed to stay reasonably fit. Dominique, on the other hand, worked at a local factory. I'm not sure of his official specialty, but I know it involves lifting heavy things many times a day for 8 to 10 hours straight, not to mention that he practically lives at the gym. As you can imagine, he's very muscular. While I keep my hair short and neatly groomed, he has long hair that he ties back in a ponytail, and his full beard completes his Aztec warrior look. Dominique looks like Drogo from Game of Thrones, while I'm more of a Don Draper from Mad Men type. I never really liked him, not that I despised him, but we didn't have any connection that could make us close friends or even acquaintances. To me, he was simply Susie's husband. Since Susie was Alicia's best friend, I saw him from time to time, but I never sought him out or had any desire to do so. I'm sure he felt the same way about me. That night, he was, of course, dressed as Tarzan. Seriously, it was cold outside, and he showed up to the party wearing nothing but a loincloth. I call that being an idiot, finding ways to act in a way that can only be interpreted as a sign of idiocy. Anyway, Tarzan was surrounded by the women, as he always did at these types of parties. He was very flirtatious and often crossed the line into inappropriate behavior. However, none of the women seemed bothered by his barely concealed advances. Instead of slapping him, they often laughed and blushed at his comments, even Alicia, which really annoyed me. You'd think Susie would find this behavior uncomfortable. I know Alicia would if it weren't for me. But Susie simply laughed along with them. Sometimes she'd playfully hit him on the shoulder and say, "Dominique, stop." But she never seriously reprimanded him or even looked at him with anger. She almost seemed proud that other women found her husband attractive. Damon, who was in a playful mood that night, had drunk enough to lower his already light inhibitions. His flirting became increasingly obvious. Single women, married women, it didn't matter. He would grab them by the waist or brush against them in ways that were too familiar. I'd seen several husbands get upset when their wives became the object of such attention, but no one reacted. Maybe they were afraid of him, maybe they were drunk, or maybe they just didn't want to cause a scene, I don't know. Still, I stayed on high alert whenever he was near Alicia. One disrespectful move toward my wife, and we'd be out of there. Alicia must have sensed my anxiety because she came over to me. "Are you having fun, Greg?" she asked loudly over the music. I nodded and took a sip of my beer, watching her sway slightly to the rhythm of the music while standing beside me. I noticed her gaze drift toward Tarzan without her realizing it, silently sizing him up. I felt something I shouldn't have, I admit it. I started to feel jealous. What kind of idiot dresses as Tarzan when it's cold outside? Alicia snapped out of her trance and turned to me. "You know how Damon is, honey, he always has to be the center of attention." I chuckled and took another sip of my beer, but it suddenly lost its flavor. Alicia noticed the shift in my mood. "Honey, don't tell me you're jealous," she teased. "Why would I be jealous of him? I don't need to go around half-dressed to get attention from women." Alicia laughed dismissively. "Of course not, honey," she said, turning her attention elsewhere. As the night went on and more alcohol was consumed, people became less reserved. After a while, Damon and his loincloth faded into the background while I hung out with my real friends. At some point during the night, Damon started flirting with Alicia. I didn't even notice until I went looking for her because I hadn't seen her in a while. I found her in the kitchen with Damon. They were standing very close, talking quietly. It was too much for my liking, and my jealousy flared up immediately. Damon was the first to see me, and I noticed him take a significant step back. Alicia must have sensed the change in the atmosphere because she turned and saw me too. She tried to smile warmly, but it looked forced. "Hey, honey, I was just looking for you," she said quickly, too quickly, in fact. "Alicia, I've been in the same place all night," I said, my tone sounding accusatory, though I tried to mask it. I shivered slightly. Damon left quickly and silently, leaving us alone. "Are you mad at me, honey?" she asked in a voice loaded with innocence. "What were you two talking about? I find you in a corner with him, whispering like two teenagers with a secret. What's going on?" "Honey, stop. Nothing is happening between Damon and me. He was just being his usual flirty self. Nothing to worry about." "I am worried. What am I supposed to think?" A brief smile appeared on her face but quickly vanished, replaced by a look of sympathy and concern. "I'm a little drunk, honey. Don't mind me," she said, patting my cheek lightly before walking away. Damon and Alicia didn't interact for the rest of the night. Believe me, I kept an eye on them like a hawk. In fact, it was almost as if they were actively avoiding each other. I noticed them exchange a few mysterious glances, but that was it. Still, it was enough, more than enough, to make me suspicious. I started feeling uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. I needed a break. The beer was beginning to take effect, and I had to use the bathroom. I went upstairs, took care of my business, and as I stepped out of the bathroom, I found myself face to face with Damon. It was as if he had followed me there, waiting for me. "Got a problem with me, Greg?" he asked, slurring his words. His eyes glared at me with a threatening expression, as if trying to intimidate me. "What?" I asked, finding the whole moment surreal. Something was definitely off about this night. I asked if you've got a problem with me. You're always looking down on me, showing off your fancy car and your luxury house. Always bragging about your money. You think you're better than me. If this conversation made no sense to you, you're not alone. It didn't make any sense to me either. You're drunk, Damon. Go home before you say something you'll regret, I said, stepping aside to avoid escalating the situation. He muttered something like, "What? Sleep soundly with your beautiful wife?" Now he had my full attention. I turned back and walked toward him until we were inches apart. "Shut up. Don't make me do something I'll regret. Leave my wife out of your filthy fantasies," I warned him. He stared at me and grinned. "Fantasies? No, stupid, I have memories." Those last words hit me like a thunderclap, ending the argument entirely. I wanted to dismiss it as nonsense, but I wasn't as sure as I had been before the party. What about the birthmark on her thigh? Or the fact that she's not a real blonde? "Oh, wait, you wouldn't know now, she's fixed that," he added with a smug grin. That was the last thing he said. The only other sounds that followed were the unpleasant crack of bone as my fist connected solidly with his jaw, and the sound of 195 pounds crashing into the wall. I stormed down the stairs like a raging bull. Once I reached the bottom, I found ALICIA. She ran toward me. "Greg, what?" The question froze on her lips. One look at me, and she knew. Her tear-filled eyes confirmed everything Dominique had said. "Oh my God. Someone call 911. Dominique is unconscious, I can't wake him up." I heard someone shouting from upstairs. I didn't know who it was, and I didn't care. I just stood there, staring at ALICIA as if I had never known her. Maybe I never truly did. People began rushing up the stairs to see what was happening, but I stayed where I was, staring at ALICIA, searching for the woman I had married. Honestly, at that moment, I didn't care whether Dominique was alive or not. "What did you do to my husband?" I heard a scream behind me, followed by small fists pounding on my back. I ducked to avoid Susie, who was hitting me in desperation. Someone grabbed her and pulled her away. "Greg, what's going on?" asked my friend Richard, the one who had organized the party. The wall, which now had a Dominique-sized hole in it, belonged to him. I ignored him completely and turned to Susie. "Did you know your husband was sleeping with ALICIA?" Susie instantly went silent and stopped trying to attack me. She looked at me as if that explained everything. But she wasn't angry, she didn't call me a liar. Most importantly, she didn't look at ALICIA. She just stared at me, as if she already knew, and now I knew too. I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Greg, we need to talk, but not here," ALICIA said softly. I turned and gave her the coldest look I could muster. At that moment, a blinding fury took hold of me, a rage so intense it felt like a white-hot light inside me. It was so overwhelming that tears welled up in my eyes, even though I wasn't crying. It was as if the tears were some sort of release valve, keeping me from exploding. "He's awake!" someone shouted from upstairs. Susie left ALICIA and me, rushing up the stairs to be with her fallen jungle boy. My anger began to subside as the harsh reality of what had just happened hit me. What if I had killed Dominique? Even if that hadn't been my intention, a moment of rage could ruin my life forever. I could already be facing assault charges. My career, which I had worked so hard to build, could be destroyed because I let myself be provoked by alcohol and the stupidity of someone who had slept with my wife. "Greg, come on, honey, let's go. We need to talk," Alicia said, her voice trembling. "No, Alicia. You're going home, with your boyfriend and his wife." "I'm leaving," I said, pushing past her and heading for the front door. Alicia ran after me, desperate, and grabbed my arm. "Greg, you're not leaving me here. We're going home, and we're going to talk. Do you hear me? You're not walking out on me." Her face was streaked with tears, a mixture of fury and immense sadness, if that makes any sense. I had no idea why she was so angry. "I can't deal with you right now, Alicia. I'm not going home. I might already be going to jail for assault. I don't want to add domestic violence to the list," I said coldly. "Yes, Greg, that's exactly what you want. Go ahead, hit me. Do it, coward. At least then you wouldn't ignore me. It would be the first time you've touched me in weeks," she yelled, jabbing her finger into my chest. Her anger grew quickly, and I had no idea why. She was the one who betrayed me. I was the only one with the right to be angry here. "Is that your reason? Is that why I don't come home and hold you every night? That's your excuse? Is that why you cheated on me, with him?" She didn't respond with words, her defiant glare said it all. "For your information, Alicia, I work to earn a living. I don't have a husband paying my bills. Maybe if you got a job, you'd understand what it's like to come home exhausted." That's when I remembered we had an audience, and trust me, they were paying attention. All they needed was popcorn in their hands. Alicia was actually mocking me. Poor Greg, too tired to make love to his wife, but he finds time to sit in front of his computer and watch adult movies every night. Maybe if you stopped searching for silicone dolls online and paid more attention to your wife, she wouldn't have to cry to her best friend about her husband's lack of interest. By this point, Alicia was practically shouting at the top of her lungs. Her fists were clenched at her sides, and her tear-streaked face reflected both pain and fury. For me, that was the final blow. I couldn't have been more humiliated than I was in that moment. I didn't have a clever comeback or any form of retaliation. I tried to say something in response, but nothing came out. Everyone around us, my friends and neighbors, was staring at me. Their faces didn't hide how they felt about what they had just witnessed: astonishment, disgust, sympathy, amusement. I had no choice but to turn around and disappear into the night. Alicia's desperate cry followed me until I started the engine and drove away. This story is based on true events, in case you were wondering. I'm not Greg in this story, I'm Richard, the one who hosted the Halloween party. Yes, I do have a Dominique-sized hole near my daughter's room. I wrote from the protagonist's perspective because I felt it would help the audience feel the rage and humiliation Greg experienced. I had to put myself in his shoes when writing this. My wife and I couldn't help but talk about what happened. In fact, it's been a topic of discussion in our house ever since. I know it's wrong to obsess over a situation like this, but it's like a train wreck, you can't help but wonder about things you don't know. Susie wasn't angry when Greg told her that Alicia had slept with Dominique, so she must have already known. Was it a threesome or something else? Honestly, a threesome involving those two would rival any adult movie. How long had this been going on? I also noticed the glances Alicia and Dominique exchanged during the party. There was definitely something between them. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe not. It was clear that Greg had been neglecting Alicia intimately, and perhaps in other areas as well. Is that an excuse for cheating? I don't think so. Does it explain why she did it? Absolutely. Women whose romantic advances are constantly rejected are more likely to be tempted into an affair, especially if their husbands show interest in other women. Even watching adult movies can be considered a form of betrayal if it makes your partner feel inadequate or betrayed. By the way, Alicia is attractive in real life. In my opinion, a man would have to be dead not to show interest in her. But this proves the truth of the saying, for every beautiful woman, there's a man who's tired of being with her. The most important question now is, what happens next? For the time being, all four of them are keeping quiet about the situation, but something like this can't stay hidden for long. It's only a matter of time. Even though this story is based on true events, I wasn't a witness to everything. I had to take some creative liberties with certain parts. For example, I didn't hear the exact conversation that took place when Greg punched Dominique. I heard about it from others. The exact words had to be embellished a bit. Obviously, I didn't know what was going through Greg's mind, but I knew what would have gone through mine if I were in his place, so I just went with that. I genuinely feel for him and the decisions he had to face. Alicia treated him unfairly, regardless of her reasons. I'm not sure whether I hope for reconciliation or divorce in this situation. I have to be honest, I'm a bit biased because Greg is my friend. And of course, Superman would absolutely defeat Hulk. I agree with Greg on that, heat vision, flight, super speed, there's no contest, unless kryptonite is involved. But that's beside the point. Mr. Chiron, you have a call on line 1. Who's calling, Betty? It's Mr. Ford. Greg's calling. I've been trying to get in touch with him since the explosion at my Halloween party. Until now, he, his wife, and the other 2 lovers had remained silent. No one had heard a word from them. Of course, there were questions, lots of questions. I mean, how could there not be? The confrontation had been so public, so humiliating, even cruel. It had all the elements of a perfect night of drama, violence, betrayal, and the epic duel between David and Goliath. Only this time, Goliath had a glass jaw and wrote a drunken check that David cashed with genuine rage. Connect me with him, Betty. Ah, sir, he sounds a little upset. Well, yes, his wife humiliated him publicly. If he weren't upset, I'd be a little worried. Thanks, Betty, I'll handle it. I waited for the click that meant I was connected to Greg. Greg. Hey, man, I've been trying to call you since, I didn't dare say the words out loud, since I found out your wife slept with that idiot. Yeah, I've had a lot to think about, Greg said. I could still sense the simmering anger beneath his calm voice, even over the phone. His emotions were palpable. So, do you want to talk? I asked. I heard him laugh bitterly on the other end, it sounded more like a scoff. Why would I want to talk to you, Richard? Hey, good friend, so you can post it online. Your exciting story needs a sequel, right? Curious minds want to know what happened next with the idiot who couldn't satisfy his wife. Your loyal followers can't wait to see how my life turns out. Great. He read my story. Now, he's not just angry at his unfaithful wife, his treacherous best friend, and her sneaky lover, he's mad at me too. Fantastic. Greg and I went to high school together. He played baseball, and I played football. Even so, we stayed connected and formed a friendship that lasted many years. After graduation, we lost touch for a while. He went straight to college, and I joined the Air Force. After graduating, he returned to our hometown and got a job as a manager at Olive Garden. Sounds like a waste of a college degree, right? That's what I told him, but he was persistent. Soon, he was promoted. He excelled at any task given to him, his numbers were always solid, and he had a great business mind. It didn't take long for him to become a district manager, overseeing several restaurants. His salary eventually matched mine. I received an honorable discharge from the Air Force after 10 years and immediately accepted a job with a company that had contracts with the military. To make a long story short, I returned to our hometown, reconnected with Greg, and our friendship resumed as if there had never been a gap. So yeah, my good friend was furious with me now, not great. Normally, Greg would try to crack a clever joke to ease the tension or at least lighten the mood. Unfortunately for me, it was pretty clear that, in this situation, that wouldn't work. Especially now. Before I could say anything, he interrupted me. The only thing I could do was stay quiet and let him talk. You know, I tucked my tail between my legs and ran away like a coward. Nice touch. His sarcasm stung in my ear. At that moment, I genuinely felt like a terrible friend. I had no defense against it. Greg, where are you? We need to talk. You know what's funny, Richard? I've suddenly become really popular. Way more popular than I was before. Seems like everyone wants to talk to me, must be because of my charming personality. That's when I noticed that his voice was slurred. I heard the sound of liquid being poured and hitting the sides of a glass. Greg, are you drunk? He laughed sarcastically. No, Richard. I was drunk an hour ago. I couldn't tell you what I am now. Okay, I get it. I'm your friend. I admit it. Now it's time to fix this. Where are you, Greg? As I asked the question, I was already putting on my coat and grabbing my keys. I had a lot of work to do, but at that moment, it didn't matter. Richard, I'm not going to tell you where I am. Don't even think about coming to this bar to find me, you'll only get yourself into trouble if you do. The line went dead. It didn't matter, I knew exactly where he was. There were only a few bars in our town worth visiting, and Greg had his favorite. Part of the reason was that he was infatuated with the beautiful bartender who worked there. She was one of those women who could flirt with you while still giving the impression that she was completely out of your league. That didn't hurt her popularity, though. She was definitely pleasant to look at. When I walked in, my heart almost broke. Greg was sitting alone at the bar, the only customer there. Glancing at my watch, I realized it was barely noon. Karen waved at me as I entered, and I could see the sympathy in her eyes when they met mine. Is this handsome stud yours? She joked, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. I nodded slightly and tilted my head to signal that I needed a minute alone with Greg. Greg, that was all I managed to say before his fists connected with me, and I saw stars. No wonder Dominique had been so badly hurt. Before I knew it, I was on the floor, wiping blood from my lip. Greg stood over me, glaring furiously. He finally shook his head and returned to his seat at the bar. I got up from the floor and gave Karen a quick nod as she continued cleaning tables before Greg could notice. She paused, watching us wide-eyed, but I gestured to let her know I was okay. She nodded and went back to work. Now that you've gotten that out of your system, can we talk? I asked bravely, sitting down beside him. He took another sip of his beer and shook his head. Off the record? He asked sarcastically. I smiled to myself, at least he still had his wits about him. That was a good sign. I thought so, anyway. This was progress, at least. You should drop the whole mom thing, he said with disgust. You get along with your mom, don't you? You've met my mom, right? Yeah. I still remember how she frisked me to make sure I wasn't bringing anything illegal into her house. We laughed together at the memory. Greg took another sip of his beer, then looked me straight in the eyes. For God's sake, Richard. It was bad enough going through that, and then reading about it, knowing that all my friends knew it was me. Greg, I wrote it, sure. But I didn't do it to humiliate you. Besides, no one will know it's you, I said, trying to convince both myself and Greg. Two Catwomen, a Tarzan, and a pirate, not to mention the pirate who threw Tarzan into a wall. How many Halloween parties do you think have seen that happen? Most of them are the same. Greg gave me a look that made it clear he wanted to punch me again. Do you think this is funny? Okay. Humor isn't going to work here. Sometimes I can't help it. You're right, Greg. I sincerely apologize for putting you in an uncomfortable position. Well, I don't regret hitting you, he said, rubbing his chin. I laughed. You still hit like a truck. No wonder you always beat me when we boxed. That broke the tension, and things slowly started to thaw. I managed to get him out of the bar and into my car. Karen shot me a grateful look and gave me a quick hug as we left. Take care of him, Richard. He's going through a lot. My jaw throbbed and was starting to swell, but I had gotten Greg back, and that was what mattered most. The moment I buckled him into the passenger seat, he passed out. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Instead of taking him to his mother's house, I brought him to mine. On the way, I called another friend, John. How's it going, Richie Rich? John asked cheerfully when he picked up the phone. John was one of those guys who still thought he was in his 20s. Great guy, though very immature. I emphasize very because most men are at least a little immature, but John took it to the next level. He's the one who started the whole Hulk versus Superman debate. He's always the life of the party, though none of the wives want their husbands hanging out with him. He has a way of making his friends act like unruly teenagers. Still, we all love him. John, I need your help. I found Greg at Mo's bar. I might need a hand getting him into my house and onto the couch. He's completely out of it. I'm glad you found him. I've been looking for him all week. After what that idiot did to him, it's a miracle he didn't put a bullet in his head. John pulled up behind my truck in the driveway, and together we got to work lifting 200 pounds of dead weight and placing Greg on the couch in my basement. It wasn't an easy task. We chatted for a bit, and then John left after I promised to keep him updated on what happened. Since I had come home early, I found myself with a quiet house. Believe me, that was rare. So rare, in fact, that I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't want to leave the house in case Greg woke up and got confused about where he was. So, I threw some burgers on the George Foreman grill and baked some potatoes. Then I checked my sports cable package to see if there were any good games on, or at least some interesting game debates. I finally settled on a documentary and started enjoying my gourmet meal. It wasn't long before my wife, Mickey, walked through the door carrying our kids. "Honey, what are you doing home so early?" she asked, kissing me on the cheek. The kids ran upstairs. I found Greg. He was drunk. I brought him here and put him in the basement. Her face immediately showed hesitation. "Are you sure that's a good idea? I don't want any drunk behavior in front of the kids." "Everything will be fine, honey. I'll make sure he stays in line," I reassured her. She stroked my cheek, and I winced. That's when she noticed the swelling. "Richard, did he do this to you?" "I'm fine, honey. Forget about it. Rich, get him out of here." "Honey, it's fine. A man just found out his wife was cheating on him a couple of weeks ago. It happened so publicly that anyone would feel humiliated. He's not in his right mind. Besides, he didn't hit me that hard, and I don't mind if he vents some of his anger on me. Also, my jaw isn't made of glass like Tarzan's. I should seriously suggest he pick a different costume next year." Mickey couldn't help but laugh at that. Watching Tarzan get kicked around by a pirate was pretty amusing. I don't think Jay was too thrilled about it, though. Yeah, Tarzan definitely got what he deserved. Dominique should spend less time lifting weights and more time punching a bag, Mickey joked. Or at least learn how to dodge, I added. We laughed together. One thing I've always adored about Mickey is her personality and sense of humor. It's one of the reasons I can never stay mad at her for long. I went down to the basement to check on Greg. His thunderous snoring reassured me that he was still very much alive. His heart was still beating, though he was functionally in a coma. I placed a pillow under his head, and he made a sound loud enough to wake the dead. The fumes of alcohol around him could have knocked out anyone nearby. "Greg," I muttered as I left him there to rest. A few hours later, a zombie resembling my friend emerged from the basement. His bloodshot eyes screamed of death and decay as he staggered into my kitchen. Mickey glanced at him, then shot me a silent warning that said it all: keep him in check, or he's out. I got up and went to the kitchen to greet him. "How are you feeling, buddy?" I asked. "Like my wife cheated on me, humiliated me in front of all our neighbors, and then a truck ran me over. At least your memory is intact, 2 out of 3 isn't bad." He narrowed his eyes. "My memory's fine. I also remember your story." "You remember how you hit me in the face because of it?" he asked, rubbing his jaw. "That part's a bit hazy." "Maybe you should hit me again just to be sure," he said. There wasn't any real malice in his words. Despite his supposed desire to hit me again, I knew he wouldn't. "Look, I've told you before, but I'm really sorry about that story, Greg. I didn't think so many people would read it, and I definitely didn't think it would get back to you. I messed up. People read it, it spread fast. I even got a message from some guy I know who heard about the party from someone else and then read your story online." "Who's this guy?" Greg asked. "You don't know him, just some loudmouth named Harry. He lives in Virginia." I laughed. "You know Harry?" "Yeah, I've heard of him. He's a decent guy once you get past his attitude. By the way, he took my side, he thinks you deserved it." Greg smirked. "Well, I'm sure you thought the same thing before you wrote that story about me," he said. Greg nodded and chuckled. I gave him a friendly pat on the back, and since he didn't seem to mind, I knew we were okay. "Richard, why did you have to make me seem so weak?" "Seriously, I just ran away like a coward." "Weak? Greg, you knocked the guy out with one punch. He was scared you'd bite his ear off. If you'd boxed like that in college, you would have been a champion. No one thinks you're weak." "Yeah, right," he said with a sarcastic grin. "It was just a hobby I didn't enjoy, idiot," he added with a smile and a shake of his head. "I really kicked his ass, didn't I?" he said, humor lacing his voice, a mix of pride and laughter. "Yeah, I bet not even a sugar rush could have helped him," Greg said, giving me a playful nudge with his elbow. "No, it probably would have taken 2 punches, I replied. He couldn't help but laugh, and I found myself laughing along with him. It was good to see Rich. "So, what happened after I left?" Greg asked. "Well, after you left on the night of October 31st, following the party in Richard's kitchen, they had to drag Dominique to the emergency room. Turns out he had a concussion. He wanted to press charges, but Susie and Alicia convinced him not to. Alicia begged him not to go through with it. She knew that if you got arrested, there'd be little hope of you ever coming back." Greg laughed bitterly and shook his head. "There's not much hope for that anyway." I nodded sadly, feeling the weight of his words. The tension hung in the air, heavy with unspoken thoughts. It wasn't until I looked up and saw my parents' garage in front of me that reality hit. I didn't even remember driving there. Apparently, my subconscious had taken me back to where it all began, my childhood home. I turned off the engine and stepped inside. Every kid has a key to their parents' house, even if they've sworn never to return. Well, maybe not every kid, but I did. It was late, and the living room I had grown up in was dark. Nothing had changed in decades: the sofa, the coffee table, the lamp. All the furniture was exactly as I remembered, frozen in place. Strangely, that gave me some comfort. That night, everything changed for me in an instant. I had always been skeptical when people told stories about how their world turned upside down in a single moment, except in tragic events, of course. But that night made me a believer. Everything I thought I knew about my life had been flipped on its head by one drunken conversation with the caveman. Returning to the familiar setting of my childhood gave me a sense of stability. After an earthquake that destroys buildings and shatters the ground beneath your feet, what people crave most is calm. And that's exactly what I needed at that moment. For now, I was safe at home. "Who's there?" I heard my mom's voice calling out. I pictured her crouched in a corner, gripping a baseball bat, ready to strike at an unwelcome visitor. "It's me, McGregor," I replied. "Oh." Suddenly, the lights came on, momentarily blinding me. I had to squint to keep from going blind. "Why on earth are you creeping around in the dark? Trying to give me a heart attack," she scolded. "I'm glad to see you too, Mom." As my eyes adjusted, I was greeted by an elderly woman in floral pajamas, her hair tied up in rollers. "Why are you here so late? And why are you dressed like an idiot?" Straight to the point, that was my mom. It was only then that I remembered I was still wearing most of my pirate costume. By now, I had lost the hat, the parrot, and the eye patch, so I did, in fact, look like an idiot. "Long story, Ma. Look, I'm going to stay here for a while. The kids are leaving tomorrow, but I'll be back, and I'll tell you everything then. I just don't want to talk about it in front of the kids." "Fine," she said. You'll notice I didn't ask for permission to stay, I simply informed her of my intentions. This might seem strange to most people, but not to us. My family isn't what you'd call affectionate. My dad is a straightforward man, he never says more than necessary and expects the same in return. "I love you" is a phrase reserved for when someone is dying. He and my mom were the perfect match because she was exactly the same way. She kept displays of affection to a minimum, whether toward him or me. How they even ended up together is a mystery that confuses and unsettles me at the same time. Honestly, I believe no one else could have put up with either of them, they were destined to find each other or suffer alone in this world. "Great, Gregory. You know where everything is. I'm going to bed." Her frail figure disappeared around the corner as she climbed the stairs. Before she was out of earshot, she shouted, "And make sure you lock the door." The next morning, I decided to face the fallout and check my phone. 29 missed calls, 15 from Alicia, a few from Richard, and several more from people who had been at the party. I didn't answer any of them. No doubt they were all people trying to get details about what had happened that night. Alicia probably wanted to know where I was. After a few hours of restless sleep, I woke up still feeling angry, still in pain, and still confused. I admit I was curious about what had happened, but I was overwhelmed by too many other emotions. I wondered where the police were, what had happened with Dominique after I left. Did he go to the hospital? Did he press charges? Am I going to jail? I got out of bed and slipped out of the house before my mom woke up. I left a note saying that I was leaving and, if Alicia called, to tell her I'd reach out when I was ready. She was free to take the kids if she wanted, if not, I'd bring them home later. Luckily, it was Sunday, so I didn't have to go to work. That was good because I needed something strong and liquid, the pain from the previous night still lingered inside me. I needed something equally strong to numb it. I parked outside my favorite bar and went in. I spent the next few weeks hiding out at my mom's house. During that time, the only contact I had with Alicia was when she came to drop off or pick up the kids. After several awkward attempts at conversation, she eventually left, frustrated. Before she left, I overheard her talking on the phone. I listened closely for several minutes. If she'd been talking to that idiot, I would have lost it. From what I could gather on her end of the conversation, she was talking to Susie. I wasn't sure if that was better or worse. I spent most of my free time between my parents' house and the bar. My dad was away on a business trip, so it was just my mom and me. Oh, what a joy. She wasn't big on deep conversations. To her credit, my mom listened and was supportive, but I don't think she truly understood. And, of course, I would never tell her about the whole adult movie thing, especially after all her warnings in my youth about going blind and growing hairy palms. During my stay with her, we spoke very little. I gave her a general idea of why I was staying at her house. She listened attentively but said almost nothing about the situation. She asked what I planned to do about it. The only answer I could give was a shrug and a, "I don't know." "You'll figure it out," was her only word of encouragement. Nothing more was said about it. It sounds pretty cold when I say it out loud, but surprisingly, it was somehow comforting. I didn't need to recount the events over and over until I was exhausted. She didn't demand daily updates on my emotional state or treat me like a fragile porcelain doll that needed to be coddled and protected. She didn't go out of her way to cheer me up. I was free to grieve in my own way, at my own pace. I took all my sick and personal days. I simply couldn't face anyone. Even though no one from work had been at the party, we lived in a relatively small town, and news tends to travel faster than the speed of light, or rather, at the speed of how quickly one gossip can inform another. I wasn't just dealing with an unfaithful wife, I was dealing with how she had publicly humiliated me in front of everyone. Poor Greg is too tired to make love to his wife, yet somehow finds time to sit in front of his computer and watch adult movies every night. Maybe if you stopped searching for silicone dolls online and paid more attention to your wife, she wouldn't have to cry to her best friend about how her husband isn't interested in her anymore. How do you come back from that? Eventually, I had to turn off my phone. Suddenly, the device seemed to develop an issue with explicit language. Out of nowhere, it kept ringing non-stop. Different faces appeared on the screen, begging me to pick up, all of them using language I didn't want to hear. I wasn't sure if it was the universe's way of checking up on me or just Dominique's wounded pride, but the police never showed up. It was interesting to see how my friends reacted. They called, sure, but none of them came to my parents' house. I realized that when people don't know what to say, they just avoid the situation. They weren't bad friends, they simply had no idea what was going on or how to help. So, they did nothing. It was both a curse and a blessing. With no distractions, I found myself constantly thinking about everything. The only way I could stop was by drowning out the terrible images running through my mind. So, I drank. At the bar, Karen became my goddess, and also my savior. The worst part about staying with my mom was being away from my kids. It was a self-imposed exile. I knew that seeing them meant seeing ALICIA. It was like knowing there was a warm bed waiting for me but having to swim across a half-frozen lake to get there. So, I kept drinking, trying to forget. It wasn't until Karen showed me a story written by a good friend that I finally broke that pattern. Trapped Between Cats, that was the title. It had surprising similarities to my life: 2 Catwomen, a pirate, Tarzan, and the Superman vs. Hulk debate. There it was. How stupid. I pulled out my phone, turned it on, and angrily dialed 7 digits. Good morning. This is Mr. Cortina's office. I'm Betty. How may I help you today? Richard. Today. At Richard's house. So, what are you going to do about ALICIA? Divorce her? Separate? Confront her? Richard asked. Greg let out a sad laugh and stared at the plate in front of him. Do I have to decide right now? He joked half-heartedly. I could see the pain reflected on his face. I could tell he was replaying the events of Halloween over and over in his mind, hearing her words like a broken record. Greg, I have to ask. Feel free to tell me to leave if this is too personal, but, the adult movie thing, what did she mean by that? Greg's cheeks flushed, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. So what? Sometimes I watch those movies, but it's definitely not every day, he admitted. Are you saying she doesn't watch them, or that you don't? I asked, trying to clarify. Of course, I watch those movies. But ALICIA said you watched them instead of being intimate with her. Is that true? I pressed. Get out of here, Richard. That's too personal, he snapped. Okay. Fair enough, man. But I just want to understand what went wrong between you two. I mean, you guys always seemed so happy. I pressed gently, watching as he poked at his food with his fork, stirring it around on the plate. She just doesn't get it, Rich. What doesn't she get? I asked. Greg dropped his fork and rubbed his face with both hands, taking a deep breath. It came out as a weary sigh, tinged with something else, maybe guilt. I work 10 to 12 hours a day. If I'm lucky, I only work 5 days a week. By the time I get home, I'm exhausted, stressed out. I have to deal with investors, angry customers, angry managers, discrimination lawsuits, and everything else. It all falls on me. If something happens at one of the restaurants, like some idiot customer claiming they saw a rat just to extort free food, I have to handle it, he explained, his voice laden with fatigue. He took another deep breath, as if preparing himself to continue. I waited patiently for him to get it all out. Alicia needs a lot of foreplay. I mean, a lot. I have to spend 30 minutes just on that. Then, when she's ready, we can start having actual sex. She likes to switch positions often, and she also wants me to talk to her throughout the whole thing. I love my wife, I really do. And when I have the energy, it's great. I know guys who complain that their wives are cold, unimaginative, or just want to get it over with quickly. Alicia is none of those things. But I just don't have the strength to do it every night, especially after everything I go through during the day, he confessed sadly. Rich, sometimes. I feel better when I'm alone. I hate saying this. I mean, every guy dreams of having a woman like Alicia, a woman who loves making love. I'm lucky to have her. I know that. But, his voice trailed off, and he looked away. Rich, sometimes I feel better when I'm alone. I hate saying this. I mean, every man dreams of having a woman like Alicia, a woman who truly enjoys making love. I know I'm lucky to have her. His voice faded again, and he looked in another direction. This kind of pain can make it harder to move forward, I said gently. Marriage is tough. It's hard to recognize the role you played in your own situation. He continued, I do a lot for her, for the girls. I work hard to give them everything I didn't have when I was a kid. My dad was very frugal, he only bought me what I needed. I want more for my daughters. And then there's my wife. I enjoy spending time with them, they're my world. But sometimes, I wish I didn't have to do something for someone else. When I get home after dealing with everything at work, I just want. I don't always want to be a dad or a husband or a boss. I think I lost myself somewhere along the way, he admitted, his voice breaking with emotion. How long has it been since since you were intimate with her? I mean, before the party, I asked gently, seeing his vulnerability. I don't know, Rich. I really don't know. I didn't even realize so much time had passed, he answered, shaking his head. I nodded slowly, trying to understand. Then I saw the anger flare in his eyes. That doesn't give her the right to do what she did. And, Richard, I didn't humiliate her in front of everyone. I didn't sleep with another woman. She should have come to me first. But she didn't. She didn't come to me, he exclaimed, frustration evident in his voice. I knew I had to take a risk with my next comment. It was important to make him see my point without making him feel like I was taking her side. Maybe for the same reason you never told her why you watched those movies. Communication is hard, especially if you don't realize there's something you need to say in the first place. How do you tell your spouse you're unhappy? He asked bitterly. Simple. You say, I'm not happy. Touché. Everything was getting too serious. Normally, when things get like this, I crack a joke. So I changed the tone. So, Greg, did you punch Bob my wall? I teased, hoping to lighten the mood. He looked at me, saw that I was joking, smiled, and shook his head. Consider us even for that story, idiot, he laughed. I thought the punch to the face made us even. Not even close. I couldn't help but laugh. Seeing Greg like he was before Halloween was refreshing, even if only for a moment. Just then, I noticed Mickey standing in the doorway, a strange expression on her face. Her eyes told me I needed to come over immediately. I left Greg to finish his food and walked toward her. "What's up, honey?" I asked. She looked nervous and pulled me closer so she could whisper. Somehow, Alicia found out Greg is here. She's on her way. Damn it, I muttered. She probably called him to yell or do something stupid, and he accidentally gave her the info. You've got to keep her out, Mickey, I whispered urgently. Mickey raised her hand and shook her head. Rich, I'm not getting involved in this mess. Greg needs to face this. He's been avoiding her for 2 weeks. She cheated on him, have you forgotten? No, I haven't forgotten. I've got the hole in my wall as a reminder. I turned to look at Greg, who was absent-mindedly playing with the food on his plate. He seemed oblivious to the approaching storm Alicia was preparing to ambush him with. What do you want me to do, Mickey? I asked. Her face softened, along with her determination, as she saw my genuine desire to help my friend. He has to deal with this himself, honey. You can be his friend and help him through it, but he can't keep running away from it. She gave me a reassuring pat and walked away. I turned back to Greg to prepare him for what was coming. Greg, I heard everything. You guys aren't exactly great at whispering. She's on her way. Greg rubbed his chin and winced in pain before a look of determination crossed his face. All right, he said firmly, pushing away from the table. He turned to me, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, I'm ready to face this. With that, he stood up and walked out the back door. A beautiful sunset unfolded across the pale sky, soft shades of orange, red, and every hue in between, a scene so serene, almost calming. Greg, the serenity's about to vanish, I said quietly. He didn't respond. The alarmed voice announcing the arrival of his unfaithful wife didn't make him flinch. He didn't even turn to look. He just kept his eyes fixed on the sky above. Alicia, I've been looking everywhere for you, honey, she said, her voice carrying a nervous urgency. She couldn't have chosen a worse way to start this. I've been in the same place all night, Greg murmured, deliberately repeating the exact words he had said to her when he caught her with Dominique in Richard's kitchen a few weeks ago. She looked slightly confused, as if she didn't understand his response. Greg, we need to talk, she said. Greg nodded, silently giving her permission. In my peripheral vision, I could see her anguish. I didn't look directly at her, but she seemed like a depressing sight. Puffy eyes, flushed cheeks, a somber expression. At least, that's how her voice sounded. I love you, she began. That's a lie, Greg interrupted. Greg, please stop, Alicia pleaded. Just stop. You can't love me and humiliate me the way you did, exposing our relationship like that in public. I would never do that to you. What are you talking about, Greg? You did this to me. I could hear the growing anger in her voice. You came storming down the stairs like a madman, then in front of everyone, you asked Susie if she knew I was sleeping with her husband. In front of everyone. If you wanted to talk in private, you could have pulled me aside and yelled at me in the car, but no, you made it public first. In a way, she was right. I hadn't seen it that way when it happened, I was blinded by rage. All right, Alicia, I'll own that part. But I didn't start this. Your boyfriend confronted me and started saying disgusting things about you in front of other people. I handled it the best I could, I was furious, and my anger was justified. Could I have handled it differently? Sure. But I didn't cheat on anyone, he continued, pausing to control his emotions. I didn't have a woman come up to me and throw my betrayal in my face. He looked her directly in the eyes. I saw how her anger began to fade, replaced by guilt and remorse. I know, Greg, she whispered. You know, Alicia. Do you really believe that? He asked, his voice quiet but firm. I saw her eyes light up again. Maybe you didn't cheat on me physically, Greg, but you weren't with me. Do you remember that night when I asked for a night together, and you turned me down? I shook my head. It was my birthday. I soaked myself in perfumed bubbles in the bathtub, thinking about the night we'd have. I smoothed eucalyptus-scented lotion all over my body. I spent an hour doing my hair and makeup. Do you remember that night? She asked. I actually did remember that night. It was the day I had to fire Frank, one of my assistant managers when I ran Olive Garden. Over the years, we'd become good friends. When I got up that morning, I picked up my phone and saw the accusations. He had been accused of having an affair with one of his subordinates. I defended him fiercely. I knew he would never do something so reckless. But the girl had text messages, incriminating ones. When those came to light, I had no choice. I was the one who had promoted him, supported him. I was the one left to deal with it, or for them to deal with me. So, as you can imagine, I wasn't in the best mood that night. But I didn't forget her birthday. I made a reservation at her favorite restaurant. I was ready to take her out for dinner. However, the only thing Alicia wanted that night was dessert. We did go out for your birthday, and then we made love that night, Alicia. I remember it. She shook her head sadly. We had a night, Greg. You couldn't even enjoy it. When I tried to hold you, you pushed me away and said you were tired. That's why I gave you space, she said, her voice breaking. She swallowed hard to steady herself, and I knew she wasn't done, so I waited. Then I woke up in the middle of the night and saw you sitting in front of the computer, watching those movies. Her words hit hard, and then she broke down. Her body trembled as she tried to cry quietly but failed. I sat next to her, unable to say a word. I began to understand a little more. Hearing her perspective, her side of things, opened my eyes. Until that night, I had seen her as nothing more than a heartless traitor. Now I wasn't so sure who she really was. I understand, Alicia. I really do. I took you for granted. Do you really understand, Greg? Do you know how devastating this was for me? Do you know how painful it is to realize that, at your best, you're still not enough of a woman? Alicia's voice trembled with emotion. I don't think you do. After that night, I promised myself I wouldn't ask you for intimacy anymore. I wanted you to want me. But you never did. So, that's why you slept with Dominique. He made you feel like a woman. I asked quietly. She sobbed beside me, wiping her nose with her sleeve. Yes, Greg. He did. A few weeks later, feeling like the most worthless woman in the world, I went to his house. I felt so depressed, so broken. I told him I needed to get drunk, and we drank. The feeling of inadequacy started to fade, but it didn't disappear. And how did you end up in bed with him? I asked, my voice heavy with disbelief. Dominique came home from work and found us completely drunk. Susie told him about my problems. He started telling me how beautiful I was, how good I looked. Susie agreed with him. He got so carried away that he told us to kiss. We were so drunk that we did. It started as a playful kiss, but before I knew it, we were really kissing. When I finally broke the kiss, I saw him right next to me, and when he leaned in, I didn't resist. From that moment, things just escalated. How many times did you sleep with them? I asked, my voice low. She turned to look at the now dark sky above us and whispered, twice. The first time, when she was drunk, had hurt enough. I had managed to recover from that blow. But knowing she had gone back a second time felt entirely different. "So, at the party, in the kitchen, what were you talking about with Dominique?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Her eyes flared with anger, mixed with a trace of guilt as she recalled the memory. "He was drunk. He was telling me how good my costume looked and how he wanted me to come over to his place that night to have fun. I was afraid someone might overhear, so I tried to make him stop. I told him it had been a mistake and that the three of us shouldn't keep this going. That's when he got a little aggressive. He started rubbing up against me. That's when you walked in." "That's not what you told me," I said, my frustration rising. She bit her lip and shook her head. "I was angry, Greg. Seeing Dominique come on to me like that reminded me that you didn't value me. Were you planning to go to his place later, since he appreciated you more than I did?" I asked bitterly. She shook her head and looked me in the eyes. "No, I wasn't planning anything like that. I was just hoping you'd finally notice me. I picked the Catwoman costume because I knew you liked Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns. You once told me how much you fell for her in that outfit. I saw the way you looked at me in it. I saw that, for the first time in so long, you truly desired me. I almost skipped the entire party just to finally get what I had been longing for. I wish you had done that. I was hoping that when we got home, you would take me." She trailed off before continuing with a bitter tone. "And then Dominique showed up. She spat his name out like it was venom. Well, none of this would have happened if you hadn't slept with him. Why didn't you tell me, Alicia?" I asked, my voice a mix of anger and sadness. She shook her head sadly and sobbed. "I don't know, Greg. I wish I knew. God knows why I didn't." "Well, I guess there's enough blame to go around," I said quietly. "So, what do we do now?" "Greg, I don't want to lose you. I love you so much. I'd give anything for us to get through this," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. My head was spinning. Could I get past this? Could I forgive my wife, knowing that I had played a role in our downfall? Could we leave the past behind? I don't know, Alicia. So much has happened. It would take a long time for us to even begin to heal. A flicker of hope appeared in her eyes. She wiped her tears and took my hand. "I'll do anything. Please, give me a chance to show you how much I love you." I looked into her eyes and saw that hope. I started to feel it too. It would take time, perhaps a long time, but maybe we could heal each other if we both fought hard enough. "All right, Alicia. But this will require a few things. First, we have to go to counseling. It's simply necessary. Obviously, we still have a lot to work through. We need to learn how to communicate with each other." She kissed my cheek and wrapped her arms around my neck. "Yes, honey, whatever you say. Secondly, you need to stop being friends with Susie." That's when I saw the light go out in her eyes, and something inside me died. "What did you say?" she whispered. "I said you should stop being friends with Susie." "Greg, why are you asking me to do this?" she asked, her voice trembling. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her in disbelief. "You can't be serious, Alicia. You cheated on me with her and her husband. What do you think I'm going to do? Just trust that it won't happen again every time you're with her or talk to her. You don't know what I'll be thinking. How can I heal if this wound keeps getting salt rubbed into it?" She recoiled as if I had slapped her, and fresh tears filled her eyes. Seconds passed as we stared at each other. "You want me to choose between my best friend and my husband? I can't do this, Greg. Please, don't make me do it." I can't describe the pain that pierced me at that moment. It was worse than the pain of discovering her infidelity. There was no rage this time to mask it. I felt my heart tighten, crushed under the weight of realizing this was too much to bear. The fact that she couldn't choose me over her best friend was devastating. It consumed me, a catastrophe of extinction-level proportions. The woman I loved most in the world didn't love me the same way. I wasn't her only love, I was just one of them. I shared the throne in her heart with someone else. Dominique faded into the background, he didn't matter anymore. He was the least of my concerns now. "Alicia, please, don't make me choose," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Alicia couldn't break her bond with Susie. That connection was clearly too strong, it rivaled her love for me, enough that she wasn't willing to sever it, even at the cost of our marriage. Sadly, we divorced a little less than a year later. It took that long because Alicia did everything within her limited power to stop it, even to the point of humiliating herself. I never thought I'd see someone as proud as Alicia beg like that, but she came to his workplace and pleaded with him in front of everyone, not to leave her. She begged. It was a heartbreaking plea, one that made everyone who witnessed it uncomfortable, even me. Secretly, I hoped Greg would give her another chance, but he couldn't stand to be near her while she refused to give up her friend. He felt he shouldn't have to share the throne in her heart, and in essence, he was right. No spouse should have to share. Now, a year later, the wounds are still deep. There were no winners here. Both of them are doing the best they can for the kids, trying not to speak badly about each other in front of them. Even so, I've spent many nights being the shoulder Greg leans on when he needs to cry. Still, something good happened this Halloween, he brought a girl to my party. She wasn't dressed as Catwoman. Maybe she's a rebound and not his next great love, but even a rebound is a step forward. In real life, people don't just bounce back from the loss of love instantly, it's a process, step by step. The heart heals gradually, not all at once. Alicia, Dominique, and Susie didn't come to the party. They've stopped communicating with the rest of us. Susie continues to support her friend and still accuses Greg of being unfair and of trying to force Alicia into making an impossible choice. In my opinion, that choice wasn't so impossible. Alicia simply didn't want to be married as much as a loving wife should. She said she was willing to do anything. It's funny how people use words like that, do anything. But what they really mean is, they'll do what they're comfortable with. I'm sure she was willing to act like they were in love, or play the role of a devoted wife. But when it came down to sacrificing something important to her personally, her marriage wasn't worth it. In my opinion, he's better off without her.